Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, I'm managing all right. I'm
Yeah.
keen to talk about, talk about the forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very strange time at the moment. The days sort of blend together. You never really know what day of the week it is, but it is a Thursday when we're recording this episode. And as Dan said, we are going to be talking today about the City forwards for the season to round out our review of the 2019-2020 squad. It's an interesting bunch, and I sort of noticed as I was putting the list together today that when it comes to transfer fees, we haven't really shelled out a whole lot of money for our forwards, which is sort of an odd thing because I guess you normally associate the forwards with, if you're going to spend money on someone, you're going to fork out a bit of money on a forward. And granted, we have Dicko, who's out on loan, who cost us $3.5 million, but other than him, we're starting with Tom Eaves, who was signed in the summer from Gillingham on a free transfer, which is sort of a common theme with a few of these players. But he's, I guess, been the leading forward for the season with 35 appearances in all competitions. 18 starts, 13 sub appearances in the league is probably the main stat there to look at. But he's scored 8 goals, which a higher return from your leading forward, with only the 5 goals in the league and then 3 in a hat trick in the FA Cup. But I guess he's one of those frustrating ones, and we always seem to have forwards like this that divide opinions, where he might not necessarily be scoring a whole lot of goals, but his build-up play and his work around the ground and holding the ball up and everything like that, everything else seems to be working really well for him. It's just finishing things off that is sort of letting him down a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, I think you sort of hit it on the head there. But everything else, I was always really impressed with his work ethic and what he was doing on the ball. Just disappointed in the lack of end product. I guess like maybe he whether it was intentional or not, but maybe if he was playing more of I guess like a false number 9 instead of
Mm.
like a proper number 9, then the stats probably reflect that sort of position more with the work that he was doing and bringing in the wide players that we're not mentioning. um, but yeah, I think it probably overall has been the return goal return is pretty disappointing. I think maybe I guess it's first season at this level, uh, but in saying that, 35 games and never really looked like he was gonna get into a goal scoring run. But I think realistically, I think next season's probably going to be a make or break for him. If he can't improve on his return from this season next year, then as much as I like him, maybe he's not quite cut out for this level.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a good point you make. I think obviously towards the start of the season when we had Bowen and Grzycki in the side, they were scoring a lot of the goals. He was just sort of there to assist and there to help create those opportunities for them. Um, it's going to be, I guess, an interesting one depending on what league we end up in at the end of the season because he's obviously shown his talents at the lower level. He was, I think, one of the most prolific goal scorers in England over the last few seasons in his League One form. So it's an interesting one. Obviously, you'd want him to have come on a little bit more, but like his first goal for us against Sheffield Wednesday was obviously quite a quality goal. He does have those flashes of talent in him. It's just, I mean, look, he just needs to sort of get on a bit of a run of scoring and see what happens. But first season at this level, sort of getting up to speed, sort of getting a sense of the level of the opposition he's been facing week in, week out. Who knows? Maybe another preseason under his belt. Next season he comes out and really hits the ground running in his second season. Another player that we actually recruited from League One on another free transfer was Josh Magennis, who we brought in from Bolton, and he, he was a decent second option to Eaves at times. He certainly has a lot of passion. I think was it two straight red cards that he's been dealt this season. So doesn't leave a whole lot out on the pitch at least. But with only the three league goals for the season, not a great return from 14 starts in the league.
No, I think of those three, are two penalties. yes, something like that. So there's that as well. But yeah, I think I don't know. He's similar to Eves. I think has had moments where he's looked really impressive, and an odd game here or there where you go, oh wow, he's really pushing a case for that first striker, first team striker. But and then the red cards and just some weird silly things that he does and sort of lets you down. He's he's been a bit of a mixed bag. Overall, I mean, I probably haven't been really impressed, and I guess it's again, we're looking at the forwards and we're looking at these goal rates, and they're pretty poor for our first two most experienced forwards that we have. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, not great from them. But I guess on the more promising side of things, we do have a couple of younger players who have also been up forward for City this season. Starting, I guess, with the most promising of the three, which is Kane Lewis Potter. And coming into this season, Lewis Potter to me reminded me a lot of the hype or the excitement around Jared Bowen coming into our first season back in the Championship under Slutsky, where he looked pretty promising over pre-season. There'd been a little bit of talk about him at the end of last season as well. And not a whole lot is expected of him as quite a young player, but if he was able to get some game time this season, I remember talking at the start of this season, just sort of saying, look, if he can get a certain number of games this season, just get that experience. That's sort of the main thing for him. And look, he's certainly looked really bright and really promising whenever he's played. And I guess the most surprising thing for me doing the research for this episode was I couldn't believe he'd only made one league start for the season. He's been around the side quite a bit. He's scored the 3 goals, which is really great. 2 goals, I think it is. But to not have more starts under his belt is a little bit surprising. I thought he might have gotten a little bit more of an opportunity, especially once Bowen and Grzycki went and we were sort of experimenting with that front three a little bit more. But I guess there's a combination of injuries and just form or not really suiting the style that McGann's wanted to play against a certain team, perhaps. But I have no doubt he'll have plenty more opportunities from next season.
Yeah, I think of the forwards for the year, he's probably the one that's most excited me. I guess just another homegrown talent coming through. That the 95th minute equaliser or whatever it was, that header that he scored. To score a goal like that at that point in the game, with such little experience and stuff, shows he's got some smarts about him. And I think also what's really taken me is how much attention he's actually been getting from the opposition defence. He's been hammered quite a few times in his 14 appearances, some really, really nasty challenges. But to his credit, he's just, got up and shaken that off and carried on. But he's looked quite promising and very dangerous. And I think if he'd had, I think he deserves more opportunities, and I'm sure they will come for him.
I think the thing that always strikes me as utterly bizarre about him is I think I saw an article in the Hull Daily Mail a few months ago when he was really sort of starting to make his mark on the side, and he was talking about obviously growing up as a City supporter, and given he's only 18 or 19, of course for him growing up as a City supporter is growing up under the Bruce era and watching the Premier League side and all of that sort of thing. And it makes me think, geez, I'm getting bloody old when there's this 18-year-old kid saying this was his childhood, watching City stars like Curtis Davies and Shane Long and so on. Those guys, I'm like, geez, that doesn't feel that long ago for me.
Yeah, it's I think that just adds to how impressive he is in a way, because I didn't even think about how young he is, but then you bring it up and you go, well, actually, some of those things, to be so young and inexperienced and everything, and at that age he's still got growing, he's still got physicality and growth to come over the next few years, which is only going to add to his presence and hopefully add to his ability to score more goals for City.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I sort of joke about it, but I think it's actually really great that there's this era of City youngsters coming through now who grew up on the side as essentially a Premier League club, and it's great to see that there'll be a whole lot more players coming through, or there's an entire generation coming through now that are used to City as this sort of top level club, this big club, small by Premier League region, and certainly a lot. A much larger club than we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, which will hopefully help with the mentality of these players coming through, that they're not going to come through and just see it necessarily as a stepping stone or necessarily see it as a small-time club, but really see it as, I want to come into the club, I want to get them back to where they belong up in the Premier League. So, look, you see it in... there's a handful of players who've already touched on this season who've come through the ranks, and hopefully there'll be several more over the next couple of seasons. But moving on to another one of our young wingers who we have on loan from Barnsley, which is Malik Wilkes, and he's an interesting one, I guess, because I think we came pretty close to signing him in the summer. I'm unsure how close we really came, because there was all of that talk about the fee that we'd apparently offered Leeds to sign him, and I sort of raised my eyebrows a little bit at the potential for us paying out a 6-figure or 7-figure fee for him necessarily at this moment. But we did eventually get him on loan in January, and he's made 10 appearances for us. And he did get on a little bit of a roll. He scored the 3 league goals for us, and I do remember just before our form really hit a slump, he was looking quite promising. He was scoring quite important goals, and as I remember saying at the time when we signed him in January, he strikes me as that sort of confidence player, and he was getting on that roll, he was scoring the goals, he was getting involved, and you just kind of felt like if that was going to continue, that would be really helpful for him.
Yeah, I think the first couple of appearances, he looked underdone, to be honest. He didn't seem to offer a great deal and everything, but once he sort of picked up that fitness and started figuring out how the team worked, he did start to showcase his ability and his skills, and did contribute with a couple of important goals. And I think you're right in saying that he was starting to look like he was a more dangerous proposition, and he had shown previously that he has ability. So it was just, I guess it was unfortunate, another player that was unfortunate the season sort of is
Petering
ended,
away, I
or
guess, yeah.
that it has went the way it did, because I think with another, what do we have left, about 10 games or something, a little bit less, 9 or 10 games to go or something, I wouldn't be surprised to have seen him add a few more to that, actually.
Is he one that you'd look at signing permanently in the summer if we were able to?
I think it really would depend on the figure that's attached to that. I'm not really sure what that is, but if it was a reasonable number, if you'd asked me, after the first few games, the first 4 or 5 games, I probably wouldn't have been interested. But he might be worth a punt, so to speak. I think he is was starting to show some stuff for us, and I think he could be a good option, moving forward. Another young, skillful, powerful, quick player.
Yeah, and he certainly didn't seem wanted at Barnsley. I think he'd only made the 1 appearance for them, so clearly didn't light the place on fire there. Another player that we signed in January was Martin Samuelson, who came in from West Ham, who effectively, I guess, swapped clubs with Jared Bowen. He made 5 appearances for us, 2 starts in the league, 2 sub-appearances, and then 1 sub-appearance in the FA Cup. And he's shown flashes of promise. He's a very skillful, quick player, which is sort of interesting given his size and stature. But he's one who really, with another preseason under his belt and sort of settling into the side a little bit more. I know he's sort of struggled with a few injuries. He's, I guess, probably the most exciting most potential out of the signings that we've made. I guess it's just a question of, some of these players can go one of 2 ways. The more flashy, skillful players, whether he can sort of settle in, get the experience, get the confidence going, get some goals behind him and some assists and creativity, or else he'll sort of, I guess, fluctuate in and out of the side and not have a real impact, because he's not the sort of player who you're going to have in the side just to be a link-up player, even like a Jackson Irvine, really. He's more someone that you really need to get some sort of return from.
Yeah, he's one that definitely I was quite excited to see how he would come on in the second half of the season. I mean, because I think, if I'm right, he's actually got quite a few appearances for, is it Norway?
Norway,
Yeah. I think he's got like more than a handful, and he's only 20 or something, which is quite impressive in itself. And I think West Ham's they've got a decent academy there, have produced some good players. So yeah, he was one that I was excited. I think a couple of injuries sort of meant that we didn't really get to see a lot of him. But I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how he develops over the next season or so.
Definitely. And then I guess last is Norbert Balok, our free agent signing from Italy. He seemed, he had a relatively promising start. I remember he played in an under-23s game against Leeds and scored a brilliant goal, which is always something you like to see. And then came in for his senior debut against Forest, I think. And unfortunately, in what appeared at the time to be a bit of time wasting, actually ended up being a rather serious injury, and he was out for a while. But yeah, look, I think it probably hasn't worked out for him. It was a bit of a punt on a reasonably experienced player at a reasonably cheap price on a one-year deal, and unfortunately injuries and form and everything else probably just haven't worked together in any way for him, and he'll probably leave the club at the end of the season, I would think.
Yeah, I was hoping probably for a bit more, but I guess that's just injuries counted against him. As you said, he had some moments for the under 23s. He looked, had some flashes of I don't know, flashes there. He looked dangerous in patches in his few appearances in the first team. But I think overall, you're probably right. Not just circumstances have gone against him, and I think you're probably right that he probably won't extend.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess looking at that group of forwards, it's a relatively small group of forwards, especially now that Jared Bowen and Kamil Grzycki have left the club. And I suspect, looking at that list, you look at the goal return, the assists, it's quite depressing when you stack it all up, because between all of those players, so it's that 6 players, they have 13 goals and 4 assists for the season. And on his own, Jared Bowen had 16 goals and 7 assists. So vastly outweighed them just as a single player. So it's actually quite remarkable when you look at it like that, and you look at the return that we had from Bowen in, just a bit over half a season, and really underlines the crucial role he was playing for us, which makes it very unfortunate that he left the club. But yeah, I guess it just, looking at that stat, it just underlines the task that McCann has ahead of him to really rebuild the club with Bowen's departure.
Yeah, it's pretty grim sort of numbers there, but I think it's sort of, even without having the specific numbers, we sort of knew. I probably knew that it was pretty severe. Looking at who we had and how Bowen had contributed before he left. But I think, yeah, it's disappointing overall. But I think, now that Jared Bowen's gone now, he's a fond part of our history. But I think, we have to move on and move forward. And I guess, we'll see what happens with whether this season gets to resume at any point, or whether we're just looking ahead to the next season. But I think we'll find someone will fill that void, or a few people will fill that void. I think we'll be fine in the long run. It's still just a little bit sore at the moment.
Absolutely. So, obviously, over the last few episodes, we've looked at the defenders, we've looked at the midfielders, now we've looked at the forwards. From the defenders, we selected Long, Elder, and Device as probably our three contenders for Player of the Season. From the midfield, we selected Stewart and Lopez. Between them, as well as any of the forwards, I mean, looking at them, I would say maybe you would suggest Lewis Potter on promise. Maybe you'd look at Eves on effort. But there's not a whole lot to select from this list. Overall, taking those three defenders, two mids into account, who would you have as your player of the season?
Player of the season. Look, in terms of the best of the forwards, I mean, I'd probably go Eves, Lewis Potter, and then to be honest, it's probably a coin flip between Magennis and Wilkes for me. Like, you know, I just think Wilkes is only on more potential versus experience, I guess. But overall, it's definitely not going to be one of the forwards in the best in the player of the season, unfortunately. As much as I am a fan of Eves, probably Device is probably my pick. I think just we talked about and how significant he is, and the just the different statistics that went with when he played and when he didn't, and the wins and losses and things. He just is such an important part of this team, and I think it would be hard to forgo him for player of the season.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. He was going to be my choice as well. I think Device, even though he's missed chunks of the season through injury, I think in some ways that almost heightens his importance to the side, because it just becomes so apparent when he's not in the side that the impact that he has. I think between his ability, between his sort of commanding presence of the side, bringing everyone together, I think you can't really go past him as the player of the season. But I think it really underlines just how bare the squad is at the moment. That he's probably played half the games for the season, and he's almost head and shoulders above the second best player of the season, I think. So, a little bit depressing, but yeah, I'd conclude that, yes, I would agree with you on Device as player of the season in that respect. Okay, well, just before we wrap up, I did want to touch on, because normally I would sort of try and cover the news on every alternate week, but because this was such a large story, I did think I'd touch in with you on your thoughts as well, because during the week we've had it leaked that Hull are the first club to write to the EFL to really sort of appeal for the championship season to be ended and to be declared null and void, I believe. I don't actually know if we're saying that the promotion places should get promoted, the relegation places should get relegated, or if we're saying everything should just be voided and we come back in August and we go again. But what are your thoughts seeing that news, and I guess knowing that we're the first club to come out and really voice our concerns and have that in writing?
There's a small part of me that goes, "Oh, the Allams are being the first to make a statement about the way that the championship should be run." That doesn't really surprise me, but I think it's a pretty complicated scenario, the whole deal. And when you look at the Premier League clubs have resumed small group training, and they've already had I think a couple of clubs have got new cases of COVID-19 appearing. I mean, it's pretty interesting. It's just a wild time, I guess. And I mean, yeah, I guess without knowing the full specifics of what they've laid out in their letter and what they've proposed, but as disappointing as it would be for me as a fan to not be able to watch any more championship action this season, there is a point where you're going, well, if a new season's supposed to start in August, we're almost at June. Where do we find time to fit those games in, and then have let them have a break before, or or is it supposed to, or are we just starting a new just not sure how it would all go, because if you tried to make the them play this and then start the new season, does the PFA then get in and say, well, we're supposed to have a break at this time, and like there's just so many layers to this whole situation that it's well above my pay grade, to be honest.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting one because
it's hard not to look at the Allams letter and think, of course, the fact that we're 1.1 place above the relegation places. Our no wins since the 1st of January. There's a lot of factors to say that there's ulterior motives to wanting the season suspended or cancelled. But you also look at, as you say, you look at Premier League players starting to contract the virus, Premier League players expressing their concern with going back to playing football. It's a really difficult one. I don't think there's a right answer here. I don't think you can't void the season and say that was absolutely the correct decision and the right thing to do, because there's so many ordinary people whose income relies on their ability to, the kit man, the ball boys, the whoever's that would still be involved even behind closed doors, who are relying on income from football, that everyone sort of looks at the players and the managers and thinks, well, they don't necessarily need the football because they've got their income, they're fine. But, there's so many other people relying on it that it becomes such a difficult decision to void it. But then, as we're saying, to bring it back, there's all sorts of risks as well. So, look, it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks. It's going to be a very interesting time in history, really, to look at what's going to happen going forward, because the elephant in the room is, even if the season gets voided and they say, okay, we're going to come back in August, not everything might not be better in August. It might be worse in August. So we might be here for another 12 months waiting for football to resume. It might be 18 months. It might be whatever, if there's no vaccine ever discovered, at what point do we say, okay, well, this is the acceptable level of risk? Or do we just say, that's it, professional sport as we know it is gone? So look, it's crazy times.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think, I guess when you talk about the Allams and whether they have ulterior motives for voiding the season, I think that's just a factor that's going to come into every club's going to have their own opinion, and it's all going to be based on their own particular circumstance. Like Leeds and West Brom are certainly not going to be worried about us and or Barnsley or anything like that, and how the season, how they want the season to end and how that was going to affect us. They're only going to want, that they're just going to be talking about ensuring that they get promotion. Like if it's just a matter of circumstance, and our circumstance is that in our best interest would be for the season to void and for us to not get relegated. So that's what we're pushing for, which, is fine. I don't really have a problem with that, because you've got to try and look after yourself somehow. We can't do it on the pitch anymore at the moment. So it's the Allams are trying to do what they can. As you say, many people won't agree with it, but it is what it is, and we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me tonight, Dan. It's been good to look back. In some ways, it's been good to look back at the squad and reflect on the season. In other ways, it's been a little bit depressing.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess we'll just look. I'm looking forward to a time where we can actually watch some football again and just have something specific to talk about. This is very it's hard to talk about when there's nothing happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will be ending the season with this episode, pending, of course, any resumption of football. So stay tuned if there is any football to be played. We will of course be covering those games. But otherwise, we'll be back when the next season begins, whenever that may be. So thanks again for joining me, Dan.
No worries.
And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
Going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.